So, imagine you've been walking up the grand front steps of a building your entire life.
Okay.
You know exactly how many steps there are, you know the rhythm of the climb, and I mean, it has always just worked perfectly for you.
Right. It's comfortable. You don't even think about it.
Exactly. But then one day, you show up, and there's this construction crew pouring a concrete wheelchair ramp off to the side.
Oh, wow.
And
Right.
if you look at that ramp through a certain psychological lens, you might suddenly feel this pang of, I don't know, loss. Like your stairs are somehow less important now, or that the person using the ramp is getting special treatment, like a custom entrance just for them.
Yeah. And honestly, it is a completely human reaction to change. We see a new accommodation or a new cultural structure being built, and our brains instantly try to calculate what that means for our own standing.
And that visceral reaction, that feeling of, wait, what about my space? That is exactly what we are plunging into today. Welcome to today's deep dive.
It's going to be a heavy one.
It really is. We are unpacking a raw, intensely unfiltered debate script. It's titled, What About White People? Truth, Tension, and History Unfiltered. And it is this high-energy clash of perspectives regarding race, representation, and basically how we frame the American story.
It's intense because when you strip away the shouting that usually surrounds these topics, you're left with fundamentally different ways of defining fairness.
Yeah. But before we go any further, I mean, we need to be crystal clear with you listening. This material touches on some of the most highly charged social themes out there.
Definitely.
So we are not taking sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of either perspective in this text. Our mission today is purely to impartially report on the content provided, to map out the rhetoric, and really just help you unpack the core ideas driving this fascinating tension.
We're just looking at the architecture of the arguments. This text captures that underlying clash perfectly.
A very palpable sense of loss. There's this voice in the text that points to modern society. Things like Black History Month, historically Black colleges, a Black Miss America, and they ask a very blunt question. They ask, what do white people get?
Oh, right.
Yeah, there is this genuine stated anxiety that everything is shifting away from them,
Right.
that they are basically being replaced in the cultural narrative.
Well, that anxiety is deeply rooted in what sociologists call a zero-sum mindset.
Zero-sum game, right?
Exactly. It's essentially this evolutionary glitch in our brains where we assume all resources, even abstract ones, are finite.
Wait, abstract ones, like what?
Like cultural recognition, empathy, or even historical focus. Our brains treat them like physical objects.
Yeah.
Think of it like a pie. If someone else is handed a slice of pie, my brain assumes my slice must be getting smaller.
Right, because there's only so much pie to go around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the text captures this beautifully. The skeptical perspective sees new cultural spaces being carved out and instantly interprets that addition as a personal demotion.
But then the counter-argument in the script doesn't just say, you're wrong to feel that way. It completely redefines the action itself. It says, what looks like loss or replacement to you is actually just correction.
What's fascinating here is how the text surgically shifts the vocabulary of the entire debate.
How so?
It takes the word privilege and replaces it with the word survival.
Oh, wow. That is a big shift.
Huge. When the skeptical voice looks at historically Black colleges, they see exclusivity. They see a perk. But the counter perspective forces a historical zoom out. It asks the reader to look at why these institutions were built in the first place.
Right.
They weren't constructed as a bonus. They were built because Black Americans were systematically and legally locked out of white institutions.
So going back to that ramp analogy we started with, the stairs are the established institutions.
Oh, yeah.
They've always been there, functioning perfectly for the people who can walk up them. The ramp isn't a luxury item. It is a mechanism for access that was previously denied by the very architecture of the building.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, the text explicitly argues that building your own door when the main one is dead-bolted shut isn't a privilege. It is survival.
Exactly.
But I want to pause on that for a second. Let's really look at this from the first person's point of view.
Okay.
Because if someone genuinely feels they are losing their place in society, if they're looking at their town, their media, their culture changing, how does the text suggest we handle that raw emotion of favoritism?
That's the tricky part, right?
Yeah, because this voice in the debate isn't speaking in academic theories. They are expressing a visceral feeling of being sidelined. So if the only answer is, it's survival, not privilege, does the text offer a way to bridge that emotional gap, or does it just dismiss the feeling entirely?
I mean, it doesn't dismiss the emotion, but it does relentlessly challenge the data feeding that emotion.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
The argument here is that the feeling of being sidelined is very real to the person experiencing it, but it's based on an incomplete map of reality. It's like feeling terrified because you think you're lost in the deep woods.
Right.
But then someone points out you were actually just in a large city park. The fear was real, but the context changes everything.
Oh,
By bringing in the historical reality of segregation, the text challenges the reader to update their emotional response. It asks them to realize that the favoritism they perceive is actually just the leveling of a historically tilted playing field.
Man, that idea of an incomplete map leads us perfectly into how the debate tackles time and memory.
Yes, the historical narrative.
Exactly, because once you understand how physical spaces like colleges were restricted, you naturally have to look at mental space. The history books, the calendar. The skeptical voice in the text brings up Black History Month and asks a question you hear, all the time.
Why separate history?
Yes, why separate history? Why not just American history?
Which sounds, on its surface, like an incredibly reasonable appeal to unity. Like, why use labels? Let's just put everyone in the same curriculum and call it American history.
But the counter-argument comes back swinging at that premise. It argues that you cannot integrate a story if half the pages were deliberately left blank.
Right.
The specific phrase the text uses is that omission was the norm. And we really need to think about how omission actually worked in practice. It wasn't just society accidentally forgetting, you know?
It was active curation.
Exactly. For generations, textbooks literally wrote out the contributions, the struggles, and the very existence of millions of people to craft a specific national narrative.
We connect this to the bigger picture. The text is laying out a non-negotiable prerequisite for integration. True integration requires historical restoration first.
Historical restoration.
Yeah. You cannot just suddenly say, we are all one, while still operating from a textbook that only tells one side of the story.
Right.
Black History Month, according to this argument, isn't an act of dividing the country. It is an act of recovering those missing pages. It's the archaeological dig required before you can even begin to write a unified history.
Wait, but let's push on that logic for a second.
Okay, play devil's advocate.
If the ultimate goal, like the promised land, is a unified American history, doesn't creating a separate month or highlighting separate holidays actively work against that goal?
How so?
Well, if we keep pointing out the differences and sectioning off the calendar, aren't we just reinforcing the walls we claim we want to tear down?
That is the exact tension the source material is trying to surface. One side sees the separate holiday as a wedge driving people apart. The other side frames it as a spotlight, illuminating a dark corner.
A spotlight, okay.
And this friction hits an absolute boiling point in the text when the topic of Juneteenth comes up.
Oh, yeah. The Juneteenth exchange is intense. The skeptical voice basically asks, another holiday, where does it stop?
Right, they view it as an excess, like society's just cluttering the calendar with historical grievances.
Yeah. And the counter perspective defines Juneteenth not as an excess, but as an acknowledgement of, quote, unfinished justice.
Unfinished justice. That is a massive conceptual shift.
It really is.
Juneteenth marks the moment enslaved people in Texas found out they were free 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation.
2.5 years of delayed freedom.
Exactly. So to put it in the terms of the argument, it forces the country to remember that its promises haven't always been delivered on time.
Wow, yeah.
By putting that specific delay on the calendar, you aren't dividing the country. You are making the calendar an instrument of accountability. You are forcing the national memory to hold on to the fact that justice delayed is a baked-in part of the American story.
Accountability. That is the perfect word because it sets up the most volatile part of this entire debate. The text goes there.
It really does.
It introduces a direct comparison of historical atrocities. The skeptical voice brings up the Holocaust. They point out that it was an unimaginable horror and arguably more recent in the timeline of modern history. Yet they claim that you don't hear Jewish people constantly, asking for more or dwelling on it in the same way.
Comparing historical traumas is always a rhetorical minefield. It usually shuts down conversation completely because people get incredibly defensive.
For sure.
But the text uses this highly charged comparison to illustrate a very specific mechanical difference in how societies achieve closure.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The counter-argument in the script is described as almost cutting. It doesn't back down from the comparison at all.
It leans right into it.
Yeah. It says, actually, Jewish people did ask. They demanded. And they received reparations, international acknowledgement, and formal compensation.
Yes.
The text uses a very specific word. It says that history was addressed, and then it pivots and describes American slavery as still largely unpaid, unrepaired, unresolved.
This raises an important question about the anatomy of an apology. Like, what does a society actually have to do to move forward? The text is drawing a hard line between a history that has been actively addressed and a history that has been left open.
Let's think about this in terms of treating a massive physical trauma, a societal wound.
Okay, I like that analogy.
In the first scenario, the Holocaust, the international community treated the wound. And what does a societal stitch actually look like?
What does it look like?
It looks like the Nuremberg trials. It looks like the German government paying billions in Holocaust reparations over decades.
Right.
It looks like making Holocaust denial a literal crime in certain countries. The wound leaves a massive, permanent, devastating scar, but there was an active structural process of treating it.
The ledger was opened, and massive structural efforts were made to balance it, however impossible fully balancing it might be.
Exactly. But then you look at the second scenario, American slavery, as framed by the text. This is a wound that was never properly stitched.
No.
There were no massive sweeping reparations for the formerly enslaved. There was no comprehensive national compensation. The wound was just left open, and generations of people were essentially told to walk it off and let time heal it. So by putting these two traumas side by side, what is the text fundamentally trying to tell us about how societies achieve closure?
It is arguing that time, on its own, has no healing properties for systemic issues.
Time doesn't heal all wounds.
Exactly. The sheer passage of 100 or 200 years does not magically stitch a societal wound if the required actions, the structural apologies, the compensation, the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are entirely absent.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The text asserts that without tangible intervention, history doesn't become the past. It remains active. It remains a ghost haunting the present because it is, as the text says, unpaid and unresolved. You cannot just wish away the compound interest of history.
The compound interest of history. Wow. And that brings us to the emotional climax of the script.
It does.
After all this intense back and forth about wounds and holidays and institutions, the confrontation actually cools down. The text calls it a truth drop.
The truth drop.
Yeah. The skeptical voice becomes quieter, perhaps a bit more unguarded, and asks, so you're saying this isn't about taking anything away?
And that question is the sound of the zero-sum mindset cracking.
Yes.
And the counter-perspective delivers the synthesis of their entire argument. They lay down these core tenets. Recognition isn't theft. Truth isn't division. And maybe the most powerful one, justice isn't a competition.
The text outlines its viral takeaways right there. It drives home the idea that when one group's marginalized story is finally told out loud, it doesn't somehow erase the dominant group's story.
Right, it just adds to it.
It just brings the full high-definition picture into view, and then it makes this incredibly pointed assertion. It claims that only insecurity makes justice a competition.
That's a strong statement.
It is, and I have to push back on that specific phrasing. The text claims only insecurity makes it a competition. Isn't that a bit dismissive?
How do you mean?
Well, throughout this entire debate, the first voice has been expressing genuine fear about their changing world, about losing their place in the narrative. If we just stamp that fear with the word insecurity, does the text actually offer a bridge for that person to walk across? Or is it just a rhetorical mic drop that leaves them stranded?
That is a fantastic critique of the text's rhetoric. You could absolutely argue that slapping the label of insecurity on someone's worldview risks alienating them entirely.
Right, it feels like an attack.
It can feel like an attack rather than an invitation, for sure. However, if we look at the concluding moments of the source material, the text explicitly clarifies its ultimate goal. It states that the goal is not to force agreement. The goal is to create awareness.
So it's not trying to win them over completely, just wake them up.
Exactly. It is proposing a specific societal formula. It argues that when history is ignored, tension grows in the dark. But when history is faced head-on, something else becomes possible.
Something better.
Yeah, but it doesn't promise harmony. It doesn't promise that the skeptical voice will suddenly feel perfectly comfortable with all these changes. But it suggests that moving from a state of comfortable ignorance to a state of uncomfortable awareness is the mandatory first step for any progress.
Uncomfortable awareness.
Right. The bridge it offers isn't made of comfort. It is made of hard truth.
It is the friction of the missing pages finally being read out loud.
Beautifully put.
So let's wrap this up. Whether you are scrolling through your social feeds, sitting in a university lecture, or honestly just trying to navigate a particularly tense family dinner, these specific rhetorical battles over history, representation, and the fear of replacement are happening all around you.
Everywhere.
The arguments captured in the script aren't just confined to the page, they are the active undercurrent of our modern political and social landscape. Understanding the anatomy of these arguments, how people define a word like privilege versus survival, or how they conceptualize the past as either addressed or unresolved, is absolutely key to navigating the modern world without just reacting blindly to the heat of the moment.
It's about seeing the architecture beneath the argument.
Exactly. And that leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. We have spent a lot of time today talking about sweeping national history, about massive concepts like slavery, the Holocaust, and national holidays, but think about your own family tree.
Oh, that's a good one.
Think about your own local community. If a completely ignored or historically suppressed part of your local history was suddenly brought into the national spotlight tomorrow, maybe something deeply uncomfortable about how your town was founded or how a certain family accumulated their wealth, how would that change your understanding of who you are today?
Wow.
Does finding true historical balance require us to be brave enough to confront the uncomfortable truths about the advantages we might have inherited?
That's a heavy question to leave them with.
It is, but that's what we do here. Thanks for joining us for today's deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, and we'll catch you next time.